Picture this: a fleet of ships so enormous, so advanced, that it would make even the greatest European explorers of the age seem like they were sailing toy boats in a pond. These weren't just ships, they were floating cities laden with silks, spices, and treasures that could rewrite history. And yet, despite their grandeur, they vanished from the records as if swallowed by the sea itself. This is the story of the Chinese treasure fleets, a saga of ambition, innovation, and one of the most baffling disappearances the world has ever known. How could something so monumental simply fade into obscurity? What happened to these giants of the ocean, and why does their legacy still haunt historians today? At the height of the Ming Dynasty, China's treasure fleets were the undisputed masters of the seas. Led by the legendary Admiral Zheng He, these expeditions weren't just about trade or conquest, they were a statement. Imagine hundreds of ships, some stretching longer than a football field, crewed by thousands of sailors, soldiers, and diplomats, sailing as far as Africa and the Middle East. They brought back exotic goods, forged alliances, and showcased China's technological might. But then, almost as suddenly as they appeared, the fleets were gone. The ships were dismantled, the voyages erased from official records, and the knowledge of their construction seemingly lost overnight. It's as if history itself tried to scrub them from existence. Why would a civilization turn its back on such a monumental achievement? This isn't just a story about ships, it's a mystery that challenges everything we think we know about power, ambition, and the tides of history. What if these fleets had continued their voyages? Could they have reshaped the world centuries before Europeans set sail for the Americas? And what hidden clues might still lie buried in archives or beneath the ocean's depths, waiting to be uncovered? Join us as we piece together the fragments of this forgotten epic, exploring the triumphs, the intrigues, and the startling theories behind the treasure fleet's disappearance. By the end of this journey, you'll see history and the oceans in a whole new light. The Ming Dynasty didn't just rise to power, it exploded onto the world stage with a brilliance that still dazzles historians today. At the turn of the 15th century, China was a land transformed. After overthrowing the Mongol-led Yuan dynasty, the Ming emperors set out to restore China's greatness, but they didn't just rebuild, they reimagined. And no ruler embodied this bold vision more than Emperor Yongle. Picture a leader so determined to leave his mark that he moved the capital, constructed the Forbidden City, and commissioned a fleet so vast it defied imagination. This wasn't just about reclaiming past glory, it was about forging a new legacy, one that would stretch far beyond China's borders. What made this era so extraordinary wasn't just wealth, though there was plenty of that, but a relentless spirit of innovation. Ming artisans perfected porcelain techniques that became the envy of the world. Their silks were unmatched, their agriculture so advanced that surplus harvests fueled population booms. But perhaps most revolutionary was their approach to the sea. While Europe was still emerging from the Middle Ages, China's shipyards buzzed with activity, building vessels on a scale the world had never seen. The treasure fleets didn't emerge from nowhere. They were the culmination of generations of maritime knowledge, from sternpost rudders to compartmentalized hulls that kept ships afloat even if damaged. Yet ambition alone couldn't have launched these voyages. It took a leader like Yongle, who saw the ocean not as a barrier, but as a highway to opportunity. His court became a magnet for scholars, inventors, and explorers, all pushing the boundaries of what was possible. And at the heart of this maritime revolution stood Zheng He, a man whose rise from captive to admiral mirrored the dynasty's own trajectory. His fleets weren't just trading expeditions. They were floating embassies designed to awe foreign rulers with China's sophistication while gathering knowledge, rare goods, and even exotic animals for the imperial menagerie. But here's the twist: this golden age wasn't destined to last. Even as the treasure fleets reached their zenith, winds of change were brewing. The same curiosity that drove these voyages would eventually clash with growing isolationist factions at court. The stage was set for one of history's most dramatic reversals, where a civilization at the peak of its power would suddenly turn inward, leaving its greatest maritime achievements to fade into legend. Admiral Zheng He wasn't just a commander, he was the living embodiment of the Ming Dynasty's audacious spirit. Born Mahi in 1371 in what's now Yunnan province, his early life reads like something out of an epic. Captured as a child by Ming forces during their conquest of the region, he was castrated and sent to serve in the imperial household, a fate that would have broken most. But Zheng He transformed this trauma into opportunity. His sharp intellect and unshakable loyalty caught the eye of Prince Yu Dai, the future Emperor Yongle. When Yu Dai seized the throne in a daring coup, Zheng He stood by his side, proving himself not just as a servant, but as a strategist, a warrior, and ultimately the emperor's most trusted admiral. What made Zheng He extraordinary wasn't just his rise from captivity to command. It was how he redefined what naval leadership could be. Standing over 6 feet tall with a commanding presence, he was fluent in multiple languages, a master of diplomacy, and deeply curious about the world beyond China's shores. While European explorers like Columbus and Magellan would later sail with conquest in mind, Zheng He's missions were something entirely different. His fleets carried scholars to document foreign cultures, translators to bridge divides, and holds filled not with weapons, but treasures meant to dazzle and trade. When his ships arrived in distant ports, they didn't demand submission, they offered gifts, exchanged knowledge, and invited rulers to send envoys back to China. The scale of his achievements still staggers the imagination. Over nearly 3 decades, Zheng He commanded 7 major expeditions, visiting over 30 territories across Southeast Asia, India, the Middle East, and even the east coast of Africa. His largest ships, the legendary treasure ships, were technological marvels, with 9 masts and multiple decks capable of carrying hundreds of crew members alongside cargo holds stacked with porcelain, silk, and gold. But perhaps his greatest legacy was his ability to navigate not just the seas, but the complex politics of the regions he visited. In Calicut, he mediated trade disputes. In Sri Lanka, he deftly avoided conflict while securing alliances. And in Hormuz, he negotiated access to the Persian Gulf's riches without firing a single shot. Yet for all his triumphs, Zheng He's story is shadowed by irony. The very openness that defined his voyages, his willingness to engage with foreign cultures, to bring back new ideas, would eventually clash with the Ming court's turn toward isolation. After his death in 1433 during his final voyage, the fleets he championed were grounded, their records purged, their ships left to rot. Some historians argue this was due to shifting imperial priorities. Others point to the rising influence of conservative factions wary of foreign influence. But one thing is certain: Zheng He's vision of a connected world, linked by trade and mutual understanding, was centuries ahead of its time. Today, his legacy lives on in surprising ways. From the Swahili coast of Africa to the ports of Java, oral traditions still speak of the towering admiral who arrived with gifts and respect. Modern DNA studies suggest some of his crew may have settled abroad, leaving traces of Chinese ancestry in distant communities. And perhaps most tellingly, his voyages challenge our assumptions about history's great explorers. reminding us that the age of discovery wasn't solely a European endeavor, but a global tapestry woven by many hands. Zheng He didn't just sail the oceans, he reshaped our understanding of what exploration could mean. To understand the sheer brilliance of the treasure fleets, you have to picture the ships themselves, colossal marvels that made European vessels of the same era look like fishing boats. The largest of these, the legendary treasure ships, stretched nearly 400 feet from bow to stern. That's longer than a modern football field, built entirely from wood without a single nail. These weren't just boats, they were floating feats of engineering designed to withstand typhoons, navigate treacherous waters, and carry enough treasure to fund entire kingdoms. What set them apart wasn't just their size, but the innovations packed into every beam and plank. Take their rudders, massive, balanced blades that could be raised or lowered depending on the depth of the water, giving sailors unprecedented control. Then there were the watertight compartments, a revolutionary idea borrowed from bamboo's segmented structure. If one section sprung a leak, the others stayed dry, keeping the ship afloat. This technology wouldn't appear in European ships for centuries, yet the Ming Dynasty had already perfected it. Navigation was another triumph. While European explorers still relied heavily on coast-hugging routes, Zheng He's fleets crisscrossed the open ocean with confidence, thanks to their advanced magnetic compasses and detailed star charts. They even used sounding lines to measure depth and took salinity readings to determine their proximity to land. But perhaps most astonishing were their sails, multiple layers of reinforced silk that could catch even the faintest breeze, allowing them to maneuver with astonishing precision. Yet the real genius lay in how these elements worked together. The treasure ships weren't just collections of clever ideas. They were harmonious systems, each part enhancing the others. Their broad, flat hulls provided stability in rough seas, while the staggered mast placement maximized wind efficiency. And unlike the cramped, disease-ridden vessels of later European explorers, these ships had dedicated spaces for fresh water, livestock, and even gardens to prevent scurvy, a testament to the Ming Dynasty's understanding of long-term seafaring needs. The more you examine these ships, the clearer it becomes. They weren't just built for trade or exploration. They were floating symbols of China's technological dominance, designed to awe every port they visited. When a treasure ship appeared on the horizon, its red sails catching the sun, it wasn't just a vessel arriving, it was an entire civilization making its presence known. And that, perhaps, is the most remarkable thing of all. These weren't just ships, they were moving pieces of empire carrying the weight of history on their decks. The 7 voyages of Zheng He weren't mere sea journeys, they were grand spectacles of diplomacy and discovery, rewriting the rules of global engagement centuries before the term globalization existed. The first expedition launched in 1405 with a staggering fleet of over 300 ships, some carrying nothing but fresh water, others stocked with enough silks and ceramics to fill palaces. But this wasn't just a trading mission. When Zheng He's fleet arrived in places like Java or Malacca, they didn't just unload goods, they transformed entire regions. Local rulers received lavish gifts, from gold-leafed scrolls to intricately carved jade, while Chinese envoys documented everything from foreign customs to rare medicinal plants. In return, the fleets brought back not just spices and precious stones, but giraffes from Africa, peacocks from India, and even a supposed unicorn, likely a Javan rhinoceros, that astonished the Ming court. What made these voyages revolutionary was their approach to power. Unlike later European expeditions that often relied on force, Zheng He's fleets operated on a principle of mutual benefit. In Calicut, India, they established trade agreements that lasted decades. In Hormuz, they secured safe passage through treaties rather than threats. and in East Africa, they exchanged Chinese porcelain for ivory and exotic woods, leaving behind not conquests but thriving trade networks. The third voyage, between 1409 and 1411, even included a detour to Mecca, a gesture of respect to the Islamic world that showcased China's cultural adaptability. Yet the most astonishing journey came during the fourth and fifth expeditions, when Zheng He's fleet pushed beyond the Indian Ocean to the Swahili coast. Imagine the scene: massive Chinese ships dropping anchor near modern-day Kenya, their crews marveling at baobab trees and trading with city-states like Mogadishu and Melindi. African rulers sent envoys back to China, some bearing zebras and lion pelts as tribute. These interactions weren't just economic, they were cultural earthquakes. Recent archaeological digs in Kenya have uncovered Ming-era porcelain shards and Chinese coins, silent testaments to connections that spanned continents. But the sixth and seventh voyages carried a bittersweet weight. By the 1420s, political winds in Beijing were shifting. The new emperor, Xuan, authorized one final expedition in 1431, a last hurrah for the treasure fleets. Zheng He, now in his 60s, embarked on a journey that would be his swan song. The fleet revisited old allies, reinforced trade ties, and even intervened in a Sri Lankan succession dispute to maintain stability. When the admiral died on the return voyage in 1433, it marked more than the loss of a great explorer. It signaled the end of an era where China saw the oceans as highways rather than barriers. The legacy of these voyages lingers in unexpected ways. In Indonesia's Semarang, a cave temple still honors Zheng He as a local saint. In Malacca, legends speak of Chinese princesses marrying local sultans to cement alliances. And in the archives of Nanjing, faded maps hint at knowledge of lands as far as Australia centuries before European explorers claimed their discovery. These weren't just trips, they were the first draft of a connected world, proving that long before satellites and smartphones, humanity's thirst for connection could bridge even the widest seas. Zheng He's fleets didn't just sail, they performed a delicate dance of diplomacy, redefining how empires could wield influence without drawing a single sword. At every port, the treasure fleets executed a carefully choreographed strategy: awe with spectacle, disarm with generosity, and bind with mutual interest. When those massive ships appeared on the horizon, their decks gleaming with silks and their holds heavy with porcelain, it wasn't just a display of wealth, it was a masterclass in soft power. Local rulers were greeted not with demands but with lavish gifts: bolts of embroidered fabric, intricately carved jade, even ceremonial gold seals that symbolized the emperor's recognition of their status. These weren't bribes, they were invitations into an exclusive network where loyalty to China came with tangible rewards. The brilliance of this approach lay in its subtlety. Unlike the later European colonial powers, who often relied on brute force to secure trade, Zheng He's envoys operated on a principle of reciprocal respect. Take the Kingdom of Malacca, a strategic hub in modern-day Malaysia. The Chinese didn't conquer it, they elevated it. By recognizing its ruler as an official tributary state, they granted Malacca protection from rival kingdoms like Siam, while securing a vital waypoint for their own fleets. In return, Malacca became a bustling center of Chinese trade, its markets overflowing with Ming goods. This wasn't exploitation, it was symbiosis. Even more fascinating were the cultural exchanges that blossomed from these relationships. When Zheng He's fleet visited Bengal, they didn't just trade for muslin and pearls, they brought back artisans who taught Chinese weavers new techniques. In Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, the fleet scholars documented Buddhist texts, enriching China's own religious scholarship. and in the Arabian ports of Aden and Hormuz, Islamic astronomers shared celestial maps that refined Chinese navigation. These interactions created a web of shared knowledge, making the treasure fleets as much floating universities as they were diplomatic missions. Yet the most enduring legacy of this soft power campaign might be the tributary system itself. By offering foreign rulers a place in China's cosmic world order, one where the emperor sat at the center, surrounded by grateful allies, the Ming Dynasty crafted a self-perpetuating cycle of influence. Rivals who resisted inclusion found themselves isolated, while those who accepted tribute status gained access to coveted trade routes and imperial protection. Over time, this network stretched from the Spice Islands of Indonesia to the courts of Persian Gulf emirs, all without a single war of conquest. What makes this story so compelling isn't just its scale, but its stark contrast to the violence that often accompanied imperial expansion elsewhere. When Zheng He's fleet encountered pirates near Sumatra, they didn't slaughter them, they captured their leader and brought him to China for a stern lecture before sending him home reformed. In an age where power was typically measured in blood and territory, the treasure fleets proved that influence could be woven through silk threads rather than iron chains. The question that lingers isn't just why this approach worked, but why so few empires since have dared to replicate it. The real treasures aboard Zheng He's ships weren't just chests of gold or bolts of silk. They were the living, breathing minds that traveled with them. Picture the decks bustling not just with sailors, but with scholars sketching star charts, physicians comparing herbal remedies, and linguists decoding foreign scripts. These voyages became floating think tanks, where the brightest minds of Ming China exchanged ideas with scholars from every port they visited. In Calicut, Chinese astronomers marveled at Indian celestial maps more precise than their own. In Hormuz, Persian doctors introduced revolutionary surgical techniques. Even the ship's logs doubled as ethnographic studies, detailing everything from Sumatran marriage customs to Arabian irrigation methods, an encyclopedic snapshot of a connected world centuries before globalization. One extraordinary example lies in the field of medicine. When the fleet docked in Malacca, local healers demonstrated the use of nutmeg as an anesthetic, a technique Chinese physicians quickly adopted and refined. In return, they shared their knowledge of acupuncture, leaving behind treatment manuals that would influence Southeast Asian medicine for generations. This wasn't just trade, it was the internet of its day, with knowledge packets moving as briskly as any spice shipment. The ships even carried agricultural experts who brought back drought-resistant rice strains from Champa, modern Vietnam, transforming Chinese farming practices and potentially averting famines. The cultural exchange went far beyond practical knowledge. In Java, Chinese musicians studied the metallic harmonies of gamelan orchestras, later adapting their scales into Ming court music. Meanwhile, Javanese batik artists began incorporating Chinese phoenix motifs into their designs, creating hybrid textiles that still exist in museum collections today. Perhaps most strikingly, when Zheng He's Muslim heritage led him to commission porcelain for Middle Eastern markets, Chinese kilns produced cobalt blue mosque lamps adorned with Quranic verses, a breathtaking fusion of Islamic art and Ming craftsmanship that now ranks among the world's most coveted antiquities. Language itself became a living bridge. Persian phrases peppered the sailors' pidgin dialects, while Malay adopted so many Chinese nautical terms that modern Indonesian still uses words like jong, ship, and angin, wind, derived from Ming-era voyages. Even cuisine transformed. Sichuan peppercorns found their way into Arabian spice blends, while Southeast Asian chefs began stir-frying with iron woks introduced by the fleets. These weren't superficial imports, they were the roots of enduring cultural DNA. Yet the most profound exchange might have been the least tangible, a shift in how these civilizations saw themselves. For Chinese scholars, encountering Hindu mathematicians or Arab philosophers shattered the notion that their empire stood alone at civilization's peak. Conversely, African and Middle Eastern rulers sending envoys to Beijing began viewing China not as some mythical land, but as a tangible partner in an interconnected world. When a giraffe gifted from Somalia was paraded through Nanjing streets, it did more than dazzle crowds. It made the distant feel immediate, the exotic familiar. This intellectual ferment raises a haunting question. What might have been, had these exchanges continued? Could 15th century globalization have birthed a scientific renaissance centered in Asia rather than Europe? The treasure fleets didn't just carry goods, they carried possibilities, proof that curiosity could be as powerful as any army. Their greatest legacy wasn't in what they brought home, but in the simple, radical idea that wisdom grows richest when shared. The dismantling of the treasure fleets is one of history's most dramatic reversals, an empire at the height of its power deliberately turning its back on the world. One year, China's ships dominated the seas. The next, they were burned or left to rot in harbors. Official records were purged, shipyards shuttered, and even the memory of these voyages faded into whispers. But why? The answer lies in a perfect storm of political intrigue, economic pressures, and a fundamental shift in how China saw itself. At the heart of this reversal stood a faction of Confucian scholars who had long viewed the voyages as wasteful extravagances. To them, the fleet symbolized everything wrong with Emperor Yongg's reign, costly adventures that drained the treasury for little tangible gain. When Yongle died in 1424, these critics seized their chance. They argued that China's wealth should be spent defending northern borders against Mongol threats, not funding lavish gifts for foreign rulers. Worse, they feared the voyages were corrupting Chinese culture, introducing too many foreign ideas, from Islamic astronomy to Indian textiles, that threatened traditional values. Economics played a brutal role too. Each expedition cost as much as a small war, requiring vast quantities of timber, silk, and precious metals. By the 1430s, the Ming treasury was straining under the weight of multiple crises, failed harvests, rebellions, and the costly upkeep of the Forbidden City. Canceling the fleets wasn't just ideological, it was fiscal triage. Yet the most chilling factor may have been fear. The sheer scale of Zheng He's achievements had made him untouchable in life, but in death, his legacy became a threat. New emperors, wary of any potential rivals, saw the fleets as power centers that could challenge their authority. Better to erase them entirely than risk another admiral wielding such influence. The consequences of this decision ripple through history. Within decades, China's shipbuilding technology atrophied, its once unrivaled nautical charts gathering dust. By the time Portuguese caravels arrived in the 1500s, Chinese sailors had forgotten how to construct ships half the size of Zheng He's flagships. But the greatest loss wasn't material, it was the closing of a mindset. Where the treasure fleets had embraced curiosity and connection, their successors championed isolation, convinced that greatness lay in looking inward rather than outward. What makes this moment so haunting is the road not taken. Had the voyages continued, might China have established a global trade network centuries before Europe? Could the exchange of knowledge between Ming scholars and their counterparts abroad have sparked an earlier scientific revolution? We'll never know, but the treasure fleet's disappearance stands as a stark reminder. Progress isn't inevitable. Even the most dazzling achievements can vanish overnight when fear outweighs vision. One of the most baffling chapters in the treasure fleet's saga isn't about the ships themselves, it's about the silence left behind. Imagine entire libraries of records, meticulously kept logs of voyages that spanned decades, suddenly going up in flames. This wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate act of historical erasure, leaving historians to sift through ashes for clues. The scope of what was lost is staggering. Ship manifests detailing cargoes of ivory and spices, navigational charts that mapped uncharted waters, even personal journals from crew members who witnessed wonders beyond imagination. Somewhere in those flames vanished not just paper, but the voices of thousands who sailed on these legendary journeys. Theories about why this happened are as varied as the treasures the fleets once carried. One faction points to the rising influence of Confucian traditionalists at the Ming court. To them, Zheng He's voyages represented dangerous distractions, expensive adventures that prioritized foreign curiosities over domestic stability. Burning the records may have been a symbolic purge, a way to sever ties with an era they saw as reckless. Others argue it was purely economic. The cost of maintaining the fleets had become unsustainable, and destroying the paperwork made it easier to justify ending the program permanently. But perhaps the most intriguing theory suggests the burnings were an act of cultural self-preservation. By erasing evidence of distant lands and foreign alliances, the empire could refocus its identity inward, reinforcing the idea that China needed nothing from the outside world. What makes this loss so agonizing for researchers isn't just the absence of facts, it's the tantalizing fragments that survived. A single page from a ship's log might mention a storm near Sri Lanka, while a passing reference in a court document hints at a royal giraffe parade in Nanjing. These scattered pieces form a mosaic where most of the tiles are missing. Even Zheng He's own accounts survive only in second-hand summaries, like whispers passed down through centuries. The irony is crushing. A fleet that connected continents ultimately left its own story disconnected. Yet in this void, archaeology offers glimmers of hope. Shipwrecks discovered off the coasts of Malaysia and Indonesia have yielded Ming porcelain and navigational tools, silent witnesses to routes once sailed. In the archives of Vietnam and India, faded copies of tribute records list gifts exchanged with the fleets, and perhaps most remarkably, oral traditions from Zanzibar to Java still recount encounters with the red-sailed giants, proving that some histories refuse to be burned away. The mystery of the missing records isn't just about what was destroyed. It's a reminder of how fragile our grasp on the past truly is, and how much brilliance can vanish in a single act of deliberate forgetting. China's retreat from the seas wasn't just a policy shift, it was a complete transformation of identity, like watching a grand theater curtain close on the world stage. By the mid-1500s, the Ming Dynasty had turned its back on the oceans that once carried its glory, replacing Zheng He's bold vision with towering walls, both physical and ideological. The Forbidden City's gates, once open to envoys from every corner of the known world, now swung shut. Shipyards that had birthed engineering marvels fell silent, their master craftsmen ordered to redirect their skills toward fortifications along the Great Wall. This wasn't merely a strategic withdrawal, it was a civilization rewriting its own story, trading the endless horizon for what it believed was safety within familiar borders. What triggered such a radical reversal? The answers lie in a perfect storm of crises that reshaped Ming priorities. Northern nomads, emboldened by China's focus on maritime ventures, launched devastating raids across the frontier. Meanwhile, peasant uprisings flared as tax burdens from the fleet's expenses strained rural communities. Faced with these threats, the imperial court made a calculated choice: redirect every resource toward internal control. Naval budgets vanished overnight, repurposed to fund armies and granaries, but the deeper shift was psychological. Where Emperor Yongle had seen the world as a tapestry of opportunities, His successors viewed it as a source of contamination, foreign ideas threatening Confucian order, unfamiliar religions undermining tradition, even new crops disrupting agricultural rhythms that had sustained China for millennia. The consequences of this inward turn reverberated far beyond docks and ledgers. Without the treasure fleet's diplomatic networks, China's influence in Southeast Asia withered, creating power vacuums that European traders would later exploit. Shipbuilding techniques that had taken centuries to perfect faded from memory, leaving later generations unable to reconstruct even basic blueprints of Zheng He's vessels. Most tragically, the spirit of curiosity that had once driven scholars to collect maps from Arabia and medicinal herbs from Africa gave way to suspicion. A once global civilization began teaching its children that true wisdom lay only in studying ancient texts, not exploring new frontiers. Yet history loves irony. The very isolation meant to strengthen the Ming Dynasty may have hastened its decline. Cut off from maritime trade, the empire grew dependent on overland routes vulnerable to bandits and middlemen. When Spanish galleons began crisscrossing the Pacific with New World silver, China found itself at the mercy of economic currents it no longer understood, let alone controlled. The lesson here isn't just about ships or policies, it's about the perils of mistaking walls for strength. The treasure fleets had been more than an expression of power, they were a lifeline to a changing world, one that continued evolving long after China stopped watching the tides. The contrast couldn't be starker. While China's treasure fleets were being dismantled, Europe was just beginning to stir with maritime ambition. Picture the year 1492. Columbus's tiny fleet of 3 ships stumbled upon the Americas, a continent Zheng He's massive vessels might have reached decades earlier had the voyages continued. This isn't just a coincidence of timing, it's a hinge moment in history where 2 civilizations pivoted in opposite directions. The Ming Dynasty turned inward, focusing on land-based threats, while Portugal and Spain poured resources into oceanic exploration. But what if China had maintained its naval supremacy? The world map as we know it might look radically different. Consider the advantages China held. Unlike European explorers who operated on shoestring budgets, often begging monarchs for funding, the treasure fleets were state-sponsored juggernauts. Their ships carried not just traders but diplomats, scientists, and engineers, a mobile extension of imperial power. Had these voyages persisted, China could have established a network of fortified trading posts from East Africa to the Spice Islands, mirroring what Portugal later achieved with far fewer resources. The Ming Dynasty already had the blueprint. Zheng He's voyages proved they could project power without conquest, using economic incentives and cultural exchange to create loyal allies. Imagine a 15th century world where silk routes stretched across oceans, where Chinese became the lingua franca of trade, and where technologies like gunpowder and printing spread globally under Beijing's oversight. The economic implications are staggering. Europe's age of exploration was fueled by desperation, the need to bypass Ottoman-controlled land routes to Asia. But China already had direct access to the riches of the Indian Ocean. With continued investment, the treasure fleets could have monopolized the spice trade, controlled the flow of Persian Gulf pearls, and even tapped into West African gold mines centuries before European ships rounded the Cape of Good Hope. The silver flowing from the Americas to Europe might instead have streamed into Ming coffers, funding further expansion. Historians estimate that at its peak, China's economy accounted for over 30% of global GDP, a dominance that might have endured far longer with sustained maritime engagement. Yet the most profound difference might have been cultural. European colonialism often imposed foreign systems of governance and religion, leaving scars that linger today. Zheng He's approach, rooted in mutual respect and exchange, suggests an alternate model of globalization. Imagine a world where Swahili city-states became thriving hubs of Chinese-African fusion, where Javanese temples blended Buddhist and Confucian motifs, where the scientific knowledge of Arabia, India, and China cross-pollinated without the disruptions of conquest. The very concept of East meets West might have been irrelevant in a world where East had already woven itself into the fabric of global society. Of course, counterfactuals are slippery. History rarely follows neat what-if scenarios. The Ming Dynasty faced real pressures, from Mongol incursions to domestic unrest, that made naval retreat seem pragmatic. But the treasure fleet's abandonment remains one of history's great turning points, a reminder that civilizations rise and fall not just through external challenges, but through the choices they make about their own identity. The oceans didn't cease to matter because China looked away. They simply became someone else's stage. And in that shift lies a timeless lesson about the price of turning inward when the world is waiting beyond the horizon. Though the treasure fleets vanished from the seas, their technological fingerprints lingered in shipyards and navigation rooms across continents. Consider the humble yet revolutionary watertight bulkhead, a design borrowed from bamboo's segmented structure that allowed Chinese ships to survive breaches unharmed. This innovation didn't disappear when the Ming Dynasty abandoned its voyages. Portuguese shipwrights studying wrecks in the Indian Ocean later adapted the concept into their own caravels, giving European explorers a critical edge during the Age of Discovery. Even today, modern cargo ships use variations of this 700-year-old idea, proving that brilliance doesn't fade, it evolves. The fleet's navigational legacy runs even deeper. Zheng He's astronomers perfected celestial maps combining Arab star charts with Chinese compass readings, creating the 15th century's equivalent of GPS. When these techniques filtered westward through trade routes, they transformed how sailors approached open waters. A Venetian merchant's diary from 1453 describes a strange dial from the east that could track latitude using Polaris measurements, almost certainly a descendant of the treasure fleet's instruments. Later, Vasco da Gama's pilots relied on similar tools when they rounded the Cape of Good Hope, unknowingly sailing in the wake of Ming pioneers. Perhaps most surprising is how these innovations resurfaced in unexpected places. In coastal Vietnam, shipbuilders preserved Ming hull designs well into the 1800s, crafting vessels that French colonists praised for their uncanny stability. The Malay archipelago's traditional pinnace boats still echo the treasure ship's multi-mast configurations, a silent tribute to centuries-old blueprints. Even the iconic Chinese junk, though smaller than Zheng He's giants, carried forward key features like balanced rudders and battened sails, ensuring the fleet's DNA endured in everyday fishing boats. Yet the greatest testament to their engineering might lie in what didn't happen. Without the treasure fleet's precedent, would European navigators have dared build larger ships or venture farther from shore? The Ming experiments proved such journeys were possible, planting psychological seeds that later sprouted into global exploration. When Ferdinand Magellan's crew completed the first circumnavigation in 1522, they sailed on shoulders of giants they'd never known, giants whose forgotten breakthroughs made the world just small enough to conquer. Beneath the waves and buried in coastal sands, the treasure fleets left behind fragments of their story, silent witnesses waiting centuries to be heard. Modern archaeology has become our time machine, offering glimpses into this lost era through shipwrecks that resemble underwater museums. Off the coast of Sumatra, divers discovered a Ming-era wreck with stacks of ceramic plates still neatly stacked, as if the crew had just stepped away. These weren't just trade goods, they were time capsules, their cobalt designs revealing which imperial kilns produced them. their cracks telling stories of monsoons weathered and reefs avoided. On land, the trail grows even richer. In Kenya's Lamu archipelago, excavations uncovered Chinese porcelain shards mixed with Swahili beads, proof that Zheng He sailors didn't just visit, they left pieces of their world behind. Some fragments bear tiny repair holes drilled by local artisans, showing how treasured these items became. Near Malacca, remnants of a 15th century jetty match descriptions of the fleet's resupply ports, its massive teak pilings still resisting rot after 600 years. Even the soil tells tales. Layers of burnt coconut shells and charred spices hint at bustling dockside markets where Chinese merchants haggled with Javanese traders. Perhaps most astonishing are the personal artifacts that humanize these voyages. A bronze compass found near Sri Lanka still bears faint star engravings, likely used by a navigator plotting courses across the Indian Ocean. In Guangdong province, archaeologists unearthed a shipyard where traces of ancient dry docks suggest how those colossal treasure ships were built, their curved hull shapes echoing in the weathered stone ramps. But the real game changer came in 2010, when researchers using underwater sonar mapped what appears to be a Ming shipwreck off the Philippines, its hull packed with elephant tusks and lacquerware. If confirmed, it could rewrite our understanding of the fleet's farthest reaches. These discoveries do more than fill textbooks, they bridge gaps in our collective memory. When a Kenyan villager shows archaeologists a family heirloom, a Ming vase used for generations to store grain, it collapses centuries into a single moment. Each artifact whispers the same truth. The treasure fleets weren't just a Chinese phenomenon, but a global tapestry woven through countless interactions. As technology improves, from DNA analysis of ancient ship timbers to AI-assisted translation of recovered logs, we're not just studying history, we're piecing together the first draft of a connected world. Zheng He's final chapter is as enigmatic as the voyages he commanded, a tomb lost to the ages, its location debated by scholars and treasure hunters alike. The admiral who once stood at the helm of history's greatest fleet now lies somewhere beyond our reach, his resting place either forgotten or deliberately concealed. Official records claim he was buried at sea during his last voyage in 1433, his body wrapped in silk and committed to the waves near Calicut, India. Yet whispers persist of a secret gravesite in Nanjing, where a modest monument bears his name but no confirmed remains. The contradiction is haunting. A man whose life reshaped continents now lacks even a definitive grave. The mystery deepens when you consider the political climate of Zheng He's final years. With the Ming Dynasty turning against maritime expansion, his legacy became inconvenient, even dangerous. Some historians speculate his tomb was hidden to prevent it from becoming a rallying point for factions opposed to the empire's isolationist shift. Others suggest it was never marked at all, a deliberate erasure to sever ties with the era he symbolized. The empty Nanjing Memorial, adorned with Arabic inscriptions honoring his Muslim heritage but devoid of his body, feels like a decoy, a gesture of respect that simultaneously obscures the truth. What makes this search so compelling isn't just the puzzle itself, but what solving it could reveal. Imagine uncovering Zheng He's tomb and finding logs from his final voyage, or personal artifacts that shed light on his private thoughts. Did he foresee the fleet's demise? Were there maps or journals hinting at undiscovered destinations? The tomb could be a time capsule from the edge of a vanishing world, holding answers to questions we've barely dared to ask. Recent technological advances have reignited the hunt. Ground-penetrating radar surveys near Nanjing's Bull's Head Hill, where legend places his true burial site, have detected subterranean chambers consistent with Ming-era tombs. Meanwhile, marine archaeologists scour the seabed near Calicut, searching not for a coffin, but for ceremonial artifacts that might have been sunk with him, a compass perhaps, or a seal of office. Each clue, however faint, is a thread leading back to the man behind the myth. The irony is profound. Zheng He spent his life bridging continents, yet death scattered his story like driftwood. Finding his tomb wouldn't just solve a historical riddle, it would reclaim a connection to an era when the world seemed vast but not divided, when exploration meant exchange rather than conquest. Until then, the Admiral's silence endures, a reminder that some secrets the ocean keeps forever. The vanishing of China's treasure fleets might seem like ancient history, but their spirit sails on, not in the waves but in the stories we tell. From best-selling novels to blockbuster documentaries, these lost voyages have become a mirror for our own fascination with exploration and the roads not taken. Take Gavin Menzies' controversial book 1421, which proposed the fleets reached America decades before Columbus. Though historians widely dispute its claims, the book's wildfire success reveals something profound. We're hungry for narratives that challenge the Eurocentric tales of discovery we've been taught. It's not just about rewriting history, it's about imagining a world where the currents of power flowed differently. On screen, the fleets have inspired everything from lush historical dramas to speculative sci-fi. The documentary Zheng He, The China Conundrum, frames their disappearance as a cautionary tale about isolationism, drawing eerie parallels to modern geopolitical tensions. Meanwhile, the animated series The Dragon's Voyage reimagines the voyages as a fantastical quest, with towering ships navigating mythical storms and encountering sea monsters, proof that these stories resonate far beyond textbook pages. Even video games like Civilization feature Zheng He as a playable leader. His naval bonuses a nod to his real-world legacy. Each adaptation, whether factual or fictional, grapples with the same haunting question: what happens when a civilization abandons its curiosity? But perhaps the most telling portrayals emerge from China itself, where the treasure fleets have become cultural touchstones. In Shanghai's museums, interactive exhibits let visitors sail digital replicas of the treasure ships, while children's textbooks celebrate Zheng He as a pioneer of cross-cultural dialogue. Yet there's nuance here too. State-sponsored media often emphasize the fleet's peaceful missions, subtly contrasting them with Europe's colonial ventures. This isn't just history, it's a diplomatic tool reshaping national identity through 15th century precedents. What unites all these retellings is their shared sense of wonder and loss. Whether in a Kenyan oral tradition or a Hollywood pitch meeting, the fleets symbolize more than ships. They're ghosts of possibility, reminding us that history isn't fixed, but a tide that could have turned another way. Every time we resurrect these stories, we're not just remembering the past, we're asking what might still lie beyond the horizon, if only we dare to look. The story of China's treasure fleets isn't just a relic of the past, it's a living lesson in the delicate dance between ambition and caution. Think of those towering ships as more than just wood and sail. They were testaments to what happens when a civilization dares to push boundaries. Their voyages remind us that innovation thrives when curiosity is given room to roam, when cultures collide and exchange ideas rather than barricade themselves behind walls. But their sudden disappearance also serves as a stark warning. Progress isn't a one-way journey. Without nurturing the very systems that make exploration possible, even the grandest achievements can crumble overnight. Consider how the Ming Dynasty's shift from openness to isolation reshaped history. The treasure fleets didn't vanish because of some unavoidable catastrophe. They were deliberately dismantled by leaders who feared the unknown. In today's world, where debates over globalization and protectionism dominate headlines, their story feels eerily relevant. The fleet's success was built on networks of trust and exchange, yet their downfall came when short-term fears overshadowed long-term vision. It's a pattern we've seen repeated, from the closure of Japan's Edo period to the shuttering of scientific collaborations during political tensions. The lesson: walls may offer temporary security, but they often come at the cost of stifling the very innovations that ensure survival in an ever-changing world. Yet the fleet's legacy isn't just about caution, it's about resilience. Even as official records burned, fragments of their influence persisted. Shipbuilding techniques smuggled out of China resurfaced in distant ports. Navigational secrets whispered between traders found their way onto European maps. This hidden endurance proves that knowledge, once set loose, can't truly be erased. Today, as we grapple with digital firewalls and intellectual property battles, the treasure fleets whisper a counterintuitive truth: the more ideas circulate, the harder they are to suppress. The Ming Dynasty tried to erase its maritime legacy, but the ocean refused to forget. Perhaps the most poignant takeaway lies in the fleet's approach to power. Unlike later colonial empires that extracted wealth through force, Zheng He's mission sought mutual benefit, a model startlingly modern in its emphasis on soft power and cultural exchange. Imagine a world where that philosophy had endured, where globalization wasn't synonymous with exploitation but with collaboration. The treasure fleet's ghost haunts our modern trade disputes and diplomatic standoffs, asking us whether dominance is the only path, or if there's wisdom in the old Ming playbook of awe over aggression. As we navigate today's choppy geopolitical waters, the fleet's rise and fall offer more than history. They provide a compass. Their story urges us to weigh the costs of isolation against the rewards of connection, to recognize that innovation without preservation is like a ship without ballast, impressive until the first storm hits. And most of all, they remind us that civilizations are remembered not for what they kept, but for what they dared to share. The treasure fleets may have vanished from the seas, but their echoes linger wherever curiosity and caution struggle to find balance, a lesson as vital now as it was 6 centuries ago. Could the grandeur of Zheng He's treasure ships ever grace the waves again? That tantalizing question has sparked ambitious dreams among historians and naval engineers to reconstruct one of these floating marvels using only 15th century techniques. Picture teams of craftsmen shaping timber with traditional adzes, weaving massive sails from hand-spun hemp, and piecing together hulls without a single modern nail. This wouldn't just be a museum exhibit, it would be a time machine offering unprecedented insights into how these engineering feats actually functioned at sea. The challenges are as immense as the ships themselves. Master shipwrights who once passed down their knowledge through generations are long gone, leaving only cryptic descriptions in scattered texts. Take the legendary dragon scale planking technique, a method where overlapping wooden boards created near impenetrable hulls. Modern researchers debate whether this referred to intricate carpentry or some form of waterproof lacquer now lost to time. Even sourcing materials presents hurdles. The old growth teak used in Ming shipyards, once abundant in Yunnan's forests, is now protected. Teams might need to experiment with alternative woods or cultivate specialized timber plantations, turning the project into a decades-long labor of love. Yet the potential rewards could rewrite maritime history. Imagine launching a full-scale replica into the Indian Ocean, testing how those broad hulls handled monsoons, or whether the staggered sails truly provided unmatched maneuverability. Oceanographers could study how the fleet's unique designs allowed them to ride the region's currents, knowledge that might explain how Zheng He's navigators covered vast distances without modern instruments. The voyage could even retrace old trade routes, visiting ports where oral traditions still speak of the red-sailed giants, bridging past and present through living history. Beyond engineering, this endeavor carries cultural weight. In Gwangju, once the fleet's home port, local artisans have kept alive crafts like compass making and ceremonial sail painting. A reconstruction project could revitalize these fading arts, creating apprenticeships that echo the original shipyard's collaborative spirit. Already, a scaled-down replica built in Nanjing in 2010 proved the concept's emotional power, drawing crowds eager to touch a physical piece of their heritage. A full-sized treasure ship might do for maritime archaeology what the Titanic's discovery did for ocean exploration: ignite global fascination. Skeptics argue such projects risk romanticizing the past. Without wartime pressures or imperial deadlines, could modern builders ever replicate the urgency that drove Ming perfection? Others warn against treating ancient techniques as infallible. After all, historical records mention ships foundering in storms. But perhaps perfection isn't the goal. Like Viking ship reconstructions that revealed unexpected seaworthiness, or the Polynesian voyaging canoes that revived celestial navigation, this venture could uncover truths no textbook can convey. The real treasure wouldn't be a flawless replica, but rediscovering the ingenuity of those who sailed when the world was still wide. If the seas could talk, they might whisper secrets of these lost leviathans: how they rode the waves, how they fostered connections, why they vanished. Until then, the dream of seeing a treasure ship under sail lingers, not just as nostalgia, but as a testament to humanity's endless drive to explore. Whether such a project ever launches may depend on finding patrons as visionary as Emperor Yongle, himself modern pioneers willing to invest in history's unfinished voyages. Among the swirling legends of the treasure fleets, few claims spark as much debate as the idea that Zheng He's ships reached the Americas or Australia decades, or even centuries before European explorers. Maps surfaced over the years showing coastlines some believe match the New World, while oral traditions from Aboriginal communities mention foreign visitors in antiquity. But when we sift through the evidence, a different picture emerges. The truth isn't less fascinating, it's simply more grounded in the remarkable realities we can verify. Take the controversial Liu Gang map, a 21st century artifact purportedly copied from a 15th century original, depicting what some argue is North America. While tantalizing, experts quickly noted inconsistencies. The paper contained modern additives, and the geography mixed Ming-era knowledge with clear anachronisms. Similarly, theories about Chinese anchors found off California's coast crumbled under scrutiny. The so-called relics turned out to be 19th century fishing gear. These dead ends don't diminish the fleet's accomplishments. They remind us that their verified voyages to East Africa, the Persian Gulf, and across the Indian Ocean were already unprecedented for their time. The Australia theory stems partly from interpretations of Aboriginal rock art showing ships resembling junks, alongside accounts of yellow-skinned visitors in oral histories. Yet no Ming porcelain, coins, or ship remnants have surfaced in Australian archaeological digs, despite extensive searches. Contrast this with Kenya's Lamu archipelago, where excavations unearthed Ming-era pottery in layers dating precisely to Zheng He's era. The silence in Australia speaks volumes. Absence of evidence isn't evidence of presence. Why does this myth-busting matter? Because romanticizing unproven claims risks overshadowing the fleet's documented milestones, like their mediation of trade disputes in Sumatra or their introduction of giraffes to the Ming court. These achievements reveal a sophisticated diplomatic and logistical network that reshaped half the globe without needing to stretch into speculative territories. The fleet's legacy isn't measured by how far they might have sailed, but by how deeply they transformed the worlds they certainly reached. That said, the allure of these myths reveals something profound about our collective imagination. They persist because they reflect a longing to rewrite history's Eurocentric narrative, to envision a past where globalization wasn't spearheaded by conquest but by curiosity. In that sense, the treasure fleet's true, undiscovered lands aren't geographic. They are the uncharted possibilities of what might have been had their voyages not been cut short. The real adventure lies not in chasing phantom continents, but in rediscovering the tangible marvels these fleets left behind, one authenticated artifact at a time. The oceans the treasure fleets crossed weren't just highways for trade. They became conveyor belts for ecological change, carrying species and materials that reshaped ecosystems across continents. When Zheng He's ships returned from Africa with giraffes for the imperial menagerie, or from Java with sacks of rare spices, they weren't just transporting goods. They were inadvertently rewriting the biological code of every shoreline they touched. Take the humble sweet potato, likely introduced to China's Fujian province through these voyages, where it revolutionized local agriculture with its drought-resistant yields. But this exchange wasn't always so sweet. Historians trace the spread of invasive coconut beetles across Southeast Asia to the fleet's wooden hulls, where larvae hitchhiked from one port to another, devastating palm groves in their wake. The demand for shipbuilding materials alone left forests gasping. A single treasure ship required over 3,000 mature hardwood trees, often centuries-old teaks or firs felled with painstaking precision. Multiply that by hundreds of vessels, and the scale of deforestation becomes staggering. In Yunnan's mountain ranges, where shipwrights once sourced the finest timber, old-growth stands vanished so rapidly that later Ming emperors issued edicts protecting what little remained. The fleet's appetite for resources didn't stop at wood. Smelters worked day and night to produce the iron anchors and bronze cannons each ship required, their furnaces gulping down charcoal and belching smoke across entire regions. Yet the most lasting environmental imprint might have been the quietest, the unintended stowaways. Ships' ballast water, swapped between continents to stabilize vessels, likely carried foreign algae and microorganisms that subtly altered coastal ecologies. Rats hiding in rice shipments introduced new diseases to vulnerable island populations, while foreign seeds nestled in bales of cotton sprouted in alien soils, crowding out native plants. Even the fleet's diplomatic gifts had ecological ripple effects. Peacocks gifted to Sri Lankan kings bred aggressively, their piercing cries soon echoing far beyond palace gardens. What makes this footprint so remarkable is its duality. The same voyages that spread environmental disruption also facilitated conservation breakthroughs. Ming botanists returning from Champa brought back drought-resistant rice strains that allowed farmers to cultivate marginal lands without clearing forests. Knowledge of Indian water management techniques preserved soils in arid regions, while Arabic crop rotation methods boosted yields without exhausting the earth. The fleets didn't just take from the environments they visited. They became conduits for sustainable practices that crossed oceans long before the term sustainability existed. Today, scientists studying these historical exchanges uncover sobering parallels. The treasure fleet's era offers a case study in how globalization, even the pre-industrial kind, can accelerate ecological change. But it also hints at solutions. Just as 15th century sailors adapted foreign farming techniques to local conditions, modern conservationists look to traditional knowledge preserved in the fleet's records for clues to resilient ecosystems. The lesson isn't that exploration harms the environment, it's that curiosity, when paired with wisdom, can help heal what it once altered. The seas Zheng He crossed still bear the marks of his passage, not just in sunken porcelain, but in the very fabric of the landscapes they connected. The impact of the treasure fleets on global trade wasn't just a temporary disruption, it was a seismic shift that rerouted the flow of commerce like a river carving a new delta. Before Zheng He's voyages, trade between Asia and the Indian Ocean had followed predictable paths, with goods changing hands through a patchwork of middlemen in ports like Malacca and Calicut. But the Ming admirals' fleets didn't just join this existing network, they rewired it by establishing direct links between China and previously overlooked harbors. They bypassed centuries-old monopolies, turning sleepy fishing villages into bustling cosmopolitan hubs almost overnight. Take the port of Malacca, once a minor stopover for regional traders. After Zheng He designated it as a key resupply point, it mushroomed into what one Persian merchant called the Venice of the East, where Javanese spices, Chinese silks, and Arabian perfumes exchanged hands under the gaze of Ming officials. What made these changes so enduring was the fleet's systematic approach. Unlike earlier traders who followed the winds and whims of local rulers, Zheng He's expeditions established permanent logistics chains. They built warehouses in strategic locations, standardized weights and measures, and even posted multilingual interpreters to smooth transactions. This wasn't just trade, it was trade infrastructure on an imperial scale. The effects rippled outward. When Ming porcelain began appearing in East African markets with consistent quality and pricing, it undermined local pottery industries while creating new demand for Chinese glazes. Similarly, the fleet's preference for specific ports along India's Malabar coast marginalized traditional hubs like Cambay, reshaping entire regional economies. The most fascinating legacy lies in how these routes outlived their creators. Long after the last treasure ship rotted in its dock, the networks they'd forged remained vital. Portuguese explorers arriving in the early 16th century were stunned to find Chinese trading protocols still governing ports from Aden to Ayutthaya. Their junk routes through the South China Sea became so deeply ingrained that European colonial powers simply grafted their own operations onto these pre-existing highways of commerce. Even the Spanish galleons carrying silver from Acapulco to Manila were following a trail blazed indirectly by Zheng He's navigators, who'd first mapped the monsoon patterns that made such long-haul voyages possible. Yet the fleet's greatest commercial innovation might have been intangible: trust. By enforcing fair trade practices and punishing piracy, they created an unprecedented climate of reliability across vast distances. A merchant in Hormuz could ship goods to Quanzhou with reasonable certainty they'd arrive, thanks to Ming naval patrols keeping sea lanes secure. This reduction in risk lowered costs, increased volumes, and most crucially, encouraged specialization. Farmers in Sri Lanka began growing cinnamon exclusively for Chinese markets, knowing the demand was steady, while kilns in Jingdezhen mass-produced celadon wares tailored to Middle Eastern tastes. The resulting efficiency gains anticipated modern supply chains by half a millennium. Today, the ghost of these trade routes lingers in unexpected places. The bustling ports of Singapore and Dubai owe their rise partly to locations first highlighted on Ming navigation charts. The spice blends still used in Sichuan cuisine trace their origins to plants collected during the voyages. Even the humble fishing nets of Kerala, woven with techniques borrowed from Chinese sailors, whisper of connections that refused to fade. The treasure fleets didn't just carry cargo, they carried the seeds of a globalized economy, planting them in harbors that would nurture their growth long after the sails had vanished below the horizon. Walk through the quiet courtyards of Semarang Sam Pukong Temple in Indonesia, and you'll find statues of Zheng He dressed not as a foreign admiral, but as a local deity. Villagers still leave offerings here, whispering prayers to the figure they call Dampu Awang, a guardian spirit of the seas. This isn't just folklore, It's living proof of how deeply the treasure fleets wove themselves into the cultural fabric of places they touched. Half a world away in Kenya's Lamu archipelago, elders recount stories passed down for generations about the red-sailed ships that brought porcelain and silks, their descriptions matching Ming records with uncanny precision. These aren't scattered memories, they're threads in a global tapestry of remembrance that defies centuries of silence. The fleets left more than physical artifacts, they reshaped entire artistic traditions. In Malacca, Malaysia, the distinctive kebaya Nyonya blouse blends Chinese brocade patterns with Malay silhouettes, a sartorial legacy of intermarriages between Zheng He's crew and local communities. Over in Vietnam's Hoi An, the assembly hall of the Fujian Chinese still displays a 15th century mural showing Ming merchants presenting gifts to Cham rulers not as conquerors but as partners. Even language bears their imprint. The Malay word for anchor, saw, derives directly from the Chinese term used by the fleet's sailors, while Swahili dialects along the Kenyan coast retain nautical terms borrowed from Ming navigators. Perhaps the most poignant echoes linger in music and dance. In the Indonesian island of Java, the Bedhaya Semang dance reenacts the arrival of Chinese ships with graceful movements mimicking waves and sails, its rhythms played on bronze gamelan instruments that may have been influenced by Ming-era metallurgy. Meanwhile, along the coasts of Sri Lanka, fishermen still chant work songs with melodies that ethnomusicologists trace to Chinese folk tunes likely taught by sailors during shore leave. These aren't dead traditions preserved behind glass, but vibrant practices that continue evolving, proving culture doesn't just travel in cargo holds, it breathes in shared experiences. The fleet's spiritual legacy might be their most surprising survival. In the Philippines' Sulu archipelago, the Jama Mapan people practice a unique blend of Islam infused with Taoist elements, likely introduced by Zheng He's multicultural cruise. Their rituals include burning joss paper, a Chinese custom, while reciting Quranic verses, creating a syncretism that scholars call the Admiral's invisible cargo. Even culinary traditions carry these blended histories. The beloved Peranakan cuisine of Singapore and Malaysia, with its fiery laksa soups and intricate Q desserts, originated from intermarriages between Ming sailors and Malay women, each dish a delicious artifact of cultural fusion. What makes these echoes so powerful isn't just their diversity, but their resilience against all odds. They survived imperial edicts, colonial erasures, and modern homogenization because they weren't imposed. They grew organically from mutual respect. A Javanese puppet maker carving a Zheng He figure isn't preserving history, he's honoring an ancestor. A Lamu storyteller recounting the giraffe's arrival isn't reciting legend, she's keeping a promise to the past. These living connections remind us that the treasure fleet's true treasure wasn't gold or spices, it was the countless ordinary moments of exchange that quietly reshaped the world. One shared meal, one interwoven melody, one whispered prayer at a time. Modern explorers armed with sonar and satellites are writing the next chapter of the treasure fleet story, turning what was once legend into tangible discovery. Off the coast of Sumatra, a team led by marine archaeologist Dr. Natalia Gunawan recently unearthed a 15th century shipwreck buried under layers of sediment, its hull packed with Ming-era ceramics still stacked as if awaiting delivery. Using submersible drones equipped with laser scanners, they mapped the wreck structure inch by inch, revealing construction techniques that match ancient Chinese texts describing the treasure ships. But this isn't just about recovering artifacts, it's about decoding a lost language of maritime engineering. Each timber joint, each rusted compass needle tells us how these vessels defied the limits of their time. The hunt has gone high-tech in ways Zheng He could never have imagined. In Singapore, researchers employ AI to cross-reference centuries of monsoon records with newly discovered ship logs, reconstructing probable routes down to the week they were sailed. Over in Kenya, ground-penetrating radar has located what appear to be the foundations of a Ming-era trading post beneath a bustling Mombasa market, complete with shards of blue and white porcelain embedded in the soil like cultural time capsules. Even amateur historians are contributing. A crowdsourced project analyzing satellite imagery has identified 23 potential wreck sites along ancient trade routes, their outlines faint but discernible against the ocean floor. What drives these modern quests isn't just academic curiosity, it's the thrill of bridging divides between past and present. When Filipino fisherman Raul Hernandez accidentally netted a perfectly preserved Ming vase off Palawan in 2019, it wasn't handed to a museum immediately. Instead, local elders organized a ceremony, honoring the object as a returned ancestor before scientists could study its glazes for clues about forgotten kilns. This blending of tradition and technology reveals the fleet's enduring magic. They're not relics but living connections. The most tantalizing searches unfold on land, where faded manuscripts hint at treasures still hidden. In a tucked-away section of Nanjing's archives, linguist Professor Cheng pores over water-damaged ledgers listing gifts given to foreign rulers, some of which have never been found. His team's breakthrough came when they cross-referenced these lists with Sri Lankan temple inventories, uncovering a startling match. A jade Buddha described in Ming records now sits in a Kandy shrine, its provenance unknown to worshippers. Such discoveries rewrite history not through dramatic announcements, but through quiet moments of recognition, a prayer object's journey across 6 centuries suddenly coming full circle. These explorers share more than just tools with Zheng He's crews. They inherit their restlessness. Whether it's divers braving strong currents to document a wreck or historians spending decades deciphering a single logbook, the same spirit of curiosity that propelled the treasure ships now fuels their rediscovery. And perhaps that's the fleet's greatest legacy, not the cargo they carried, but the endless human urge to look beyond the horizon and wonder what else might be waiting to be found. The idea that China's treasure fleets were deliberately erased from history isn't just conspiracy, it's a chilling case study in how power shapes memory. When the Ming Dynasty turned inward, it didn't merely abandon shipbuilding. It launched a campaign of selective forgetting so thorough that later Chinese scholars would dismiss Zheng He's voyages as myth. Official records were burned, shipyards repurposed, even navigational charts disappeared into palace vaults. This wasn't neglect, it was historical airbrushing on an imperial scale, rewriting national identity by removing inconvenient chapters. What makes this erasure so striking is its precision. The Yongle Emperor's original stone steels celebrating the fleet's achievements still stand in Fujian's harbors, but their inscriptions were chiseled away, leaving ghostly indentations where triumphs once gleamed. Court historians under later emperors condensed decades of maritime glory into single dismissive lines, framing the voyages as wasteful extravagances rather than geopolitical masterstrokes. Even Zheng He's tomb, likely containing personal logs, vanished without trace, an absence too convenient to be accidental. The motivations behind this purge reveal a deeper struggle over China's soul. Confucian traditionalists gaining influence saw the fleets as emblems of everything they opposed: foreign engagement, technological ambition, and the blurring of cultural boundaries. By erasing them, they could reinforce a narrative of China as a self-sufficient agrarian civilization needing nothing beyond its borders. It worked shockingly well when Jesuit missionaries arrived centuries later boasting of European naval exploits. Ming scholars scoffed, unable to reconcile these claims with their sanitized history books. This rewriting raises uncomfortable questions about who controls history's narrative. The treasure fleet's disappearance wasn't unique. Think of how Soviet archives vanished dissidents from photographs, or how colonizers overwrote indigenous oral histories. But China's case is special because the censored story was one of triumph, not trauma. Most historical purges hide shame. This one hid pride. The fleets threatened a worldview that saw curiosity as dangerous and change as decay. Yet the erasure was never complete. Like ink bleeding through parchment, fragments survived in unexpected places. Folk songs about the admiral who married a princess of Malacca, shipwrights secretly passing down hull designs, even the giraffes in imperial zoos that outlived their explainers. These stubborn remnants prove that history isn't just written by victors, it's also whispered by those who remember differently. The treasure fleets may have been scrubbed from official records, but they refused to vanish from human imagination, waiting centuries for their story to resurface. Among the many mysteries surrounding the treasure fleets, none spark the imagination quite like the web of modern conspiracy theories that have woven themselves around their legacy. Some claim the Ming Dynasty hid vast troves of gold in secret island vaults, while others whisper of ancient star charts revealing forgotten continents. One persistent legend insists Zheng He's fleet reached the Americas 70 years before Columbus, leaving behind carvings in Pacific caves as proof. Though historians dismiss most of these claims, their very persistence speaks volumes, not about the fleets themselves, but about our longing to fill history's silences with grand possibilities. Take the infamous Zheng He map that surfaced in 2001, purportedly showing the entire globe with startling accuracy. Its owner claimed it was a Ming-era copy of the Admiral's secret world charts, complete with coastlines of Australia and Antarctica. The problem: scientific testing revealed modern ink pigments, while the Chinese script contained grammatical errors no 15th century scholar would make. Yet the map's allure endures, feeding into a deeper narrative that history's dominant Eurocentric timeline deliberately ignores non-Western achievements. The irony is rich. The same isolationist policies that erased the fleets from Chinese records now make them blank slates for revisionist fantasies. Other theories fixate on rumored treasure caches, from sunken ships laden with Ming porcelain off the African coast to hidden temples in Java where crews supposedly stashed tribute gifts. Metal detector enthusiasts still comb beaches from Malacca to Zanzibar, chasing whispers of golden figurines buried by sailors. The most elaborate tales describe underwater vaults near the Spratly Islands, guarded by intricate tidal traps, modern-day pirate lore repurposing the fleet's mystique. While underwater archaeology has confirmed scattered wrecks, none match these extravagant visions. The real treasure was always the networks of exchange, not chests of bullion. What's fascinating isn't the theory's factual flaws, but why they resonate. The fleets represent a road not taken, proof that globalization could have unfolded through curiosity rather than conquest. When authors like Gavin Menzies propose alternate histories where Chinese navigators circled the globe, they're expressing a very real frustration with how Eurocentric our historical narratives remain. The truth is compelling enough. Zheng He's verified voyages already dwarfed contemporary European efforts in scale and sophistication. We don't need phantom continents to appreciate that. The most poignant conspiracy might be the quietest: the idea that fragments of the fleet's knowledge survived in unexpected places. Indonesian fishermen's navigation songs containing Chinese star names, Swahili boat designs echoing Ming hull curves, even the genetic traces of possible crew descendants in coastal communities. These aren't hidden treasures, but living ones. The fleet's real secret isn't lost gold or maps. It's how thoroughly they wove themselves into the fabric of the world. leaving traces no imperial edict could fully erase. Their legacy whispers not in vaults or ciphers, but in the cultural DNA of every shore they touched. Modern adventurers armed with GPS and centuries-old star charts are sailing in the wake of Zheng He's fleets, uncovering secrets hidden in plain sight. Picture a team of researchers aboard a traditional junk, navigating the same monsoon winds that once filled the treasure ship's sails, using replicas of Ming-era compasses alongside satellite phones. These aren't just nostalgic reenactments, they're scientific missions revealing how the fleets mastered the Indian Ocean's treacherous currents. One recent expedition off the coast of Oman discovered that the fleet's recorded stopping points align perfectly with underwater freshwater springs, invisible from the surface but vital for resupplying thousands of sailors. It's as if the Admiral left breadcrumbs in the waves, waiting for us to piece together his genius. The real breakthroughs come when old maps meet new technology. In 2018, a joint Chinese-Kenyan team scanning the seabed near Malindi found a shipwreck's outline matching Ming descriptions of a horse ship, a vessel specifically designed to transport animals like the giraffes gifted to the emperor. Sediment cores taken from the site contained traces of millet and lacquerware, confirming the ship's origin. Even more astonishing were the navigational clues hidden in local oral traditions. Elders in Lamu still recite poems describing the giants who came when the North Star touched the date palm's tip, a celestial alignment that astrophysicists calculated last occurred in 1422, precisely when Zheng He's fleet anchored there. But these expeditions aren't just about validating history, they're rewriting it. When marine archaeologists dug a wreck near Sri Lanka in 2021, they expected to find typical trade goods. Instead, the hold contained meticulously labeled medicinal herbs from Sumatra, Java, and even Arabia, each stored in compartmentalized ceramic jars. This wasn't random cargo, it was a floating pharmacopoeia, proof that the fleets collected and exchanged medical knowledge as eagerly as they did silks and spices. Researchers are now testing these ancient remedies, discovering that some formulations show promising antibacterial properties, a testament to the scientific curiosity that sailed with every voyage. The most poignant rediscoveries, though, emerge from living connections. In Semarang, Indonesia, descendants of Ming sailors still practice a unique blend of Chinese and Javanese boat-building techniques, their hull curves mirroring those of treasure ships. Geneticists working with these communities have identified DNA markers linking them to specific regions in Fujian province, tracing lineages back to crew rosters recovered from temple archives. Meanwhile, in Zanzibar, a local historian recently uncovered a forgotten ledger detailing the sale of Ming porcelain in 1434. After the fleet's official end suggesting some voyages continued unofficially, their records lost to imperial censors. These modern quests do more than fill textbooks, they heal historical amnesia. When a team from Nanjing University reconstructed a segment of Zheng He's flagship using traditional tools, the project didn't just yield engineering insights. Shipwrights from 5 countries collaborated, sharing techniques that had survived in isolated pockets for centuries. The finished hull section, now displayed in a Singapore museum, isn't a relic behind glass, it's a bridge between eras, proving that the fleet's greatest legacy wasn't in the distances they crossed, but the connections they forged. Every time a researcher matches a star chart to an ancient port or a diver brushes sand from a 600-year-old anchor, we're not just uncovering the past. We're reclaiming a vision of exploration that saw the unknown not as something to conquer, but to understand. The Chinese treasure fleets remain one of history's most breathtaking paradoxes, a triumph so vast it defied belief, yet so fragile it vanished almost overnight. Their story isn't just about ships or silk, It's a mirror held up to our own ambitions and blind spots. Think of those colossal vessels, their sails blotting out the horizon, as monuments to what happens when curiosity and power align. And yet, their abrupt erasure whispers a warning. Even the grandest achievements can dissolve like salt in seawater when fear outweighs vision. What lingers isn't just the mystery of their disappearance, but the tantalizing gaps in our understanding. Archaeologists still comb ocean floors for traces of wreckage, while linguists pore over faded manuscripts searching for clues. Imagine uncovering a single untouched logbook, one that reveals the fleet's final, unrecorded voyage or a secret meeting that sealed their fate. The ocean guards its secrets fiercely, but every few years it offers up a fragment, a shard of porcelain, a rusted compass, that forces us to rethink everything. This isn't just ancient history. The fleet's legacy pulses through our modern world in unexpected ways. Global trade routes they helped establish still shape economies today. The blending of cultures they pioneered lives on in languages, cuisines, and traditions across continents. And their sudden withdrawal stands as a stark lesson about the cost of isolation in an interconnected age. When China turned away from the seas, it didn't just abandon ships, it surrendered a future it might have shaped. So what do we take from their story? Perhaps it's this: history isn't just about what happened, but about what could have been. The treasure fleets challenge us to imagine alternate paths, where exploration wasn't about conquest but exchange, where curiosity, not fear, guided empires. Their ghostly presence asks us to consider what we might be overlooking today. What marvels are we dismantling? What connections are we severing in the name of short-term security? As the search for answers continues, we're left with more than just questions. We're left with a choice to let these voyages fade into legend, or to keep their spirit alive by daring to explore, to connect, to remember. The fleets may have vanished, but their lesson hasn't. The greatest treasures aren't gold or spices, but the stories we preserve and the futures we refuse to abandon. Now it's your turn. What part of this saga fascinates you most? Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow for more journeys into the past's forgotten corners. The next discovery might just rewrite history.